my pleasure to introduce the Chairman of the Association of BellTel Retirees, Tom Steed.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Thomas Steed. I'm honored to be the chairman of the Association of BellTel Retirees. We are a 134,000 member nonprofit advocacy group for both active and retired employees of AT&T and Verizon. Now, in 1975, some of you will remember that neighborhoods in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Harlem, and the South Bronx were burning from massive arson fires. And I was a telephone cable splicer assigned to Bronx Construction, and we restored service every day. Nobody was foolish enough to come in to work in the morning and ask if a building burnt down last night. The question that was asked, how many buildings burnt down that night, so we could gauge our resources for the day and see if we needed mutual aid to assist. Now, the morning of February 27th, when I came to work, my foreman told me, you and your partner, Kevin Halligan, get in your truck and drive to 13th Street and 2nd Avenue where you'll meet me. And I was kind of shocked because I said, but boss, we never worked in Manhattan. He says, we are now. Everybody is. The building's on fire. So when we arrived down there, we parked the truck, came around a corner on 2nd Avenue, and smoke was billowing out of the upper floors. Firefighters on ladder trucks were attacking it with streams of water. Now, the fire burnt for 16 hours until it was deemed under control, but it wasn't totally out until the next morning, little hot spots here and there. So we were all geared up to go in, but we had to wait again because the building had to be inspected for structural integrity and deemed safe to enter. Now, when construction forces, linemen, splicers entering a central office exchange, the first place we go to is the cable vault. That's our domain. That's our work area. And we finally got in. There was no power to the building. With our flashlights, we could see everything was black, everything was charred, everything was burnt. So after rigging up portable lights hooked up to our generators on our trucks up on 2nd Avenue, the order was given to cut and remove everything. Clear the vault so we could pull the new cables in. Now, at the same time, a subsidy of New York Telephone, Empire City Subway, who's responsible for building manholes and the underground telephone duct banks in the city, jackhammered the concrete sidewalk up from the curb to the foundation of the building and excavated down 30 feet to expose the cable banks entering the foundation of the building into the cable vault. These were cut, and those dead cables were removed. So now finally, the line trucks could back up and start the reels rolling to pull the new cables into the cable vault. There were 488 cables destroyed. At the same time, on East 13th Street, it was a beachhead. I mean, it's the only way I can explain it. We had cranes that were hoisting dismembered frames, which ironworkers with blowtorches were cutting on the upper floors, dropping them into dumpsters, open-top dumpsters on the street. Everything that was delivered to 13th Street came in to 13th Street via 1st Avenue, because of course 13th Street was closed to civilian traffic. And most of them were flatbed trucks that were queued up, waiting in line to be told to pull up to the cranes to hoist their equipment and material into the building. Now, I remember I was assigned the noon to midnight shift. I worked 12 on, 12 off, 7 days a week. And a few weeks into the fire, I was up on the 4th floor of the building, and I looked out the window, and all I could see was tractor trailers down to 1st Avenue. And what happened was what they called a miracle on 2nd Avenue wasn't a miracle. It was logistics. It was extreme ownership of every foot of cable and every electronic switching device in the United States from here to California. As a matter of fact, some tractor trailers came from Arizona and California, 2 to a truck, 1 slept, 1 drive, priority, don't stop till you get there. So our beachhead on East 13th Street, where 95% of the material went into the building from street level to the top floor, it was an incredible synchronized, organized event. I can only explain it if you ever saw the black and white documentaries of the Normandy landing in France. It was something similar to that, only we weren't getting bombarded and we weren't getting shot at, and we were on American soil. So it was this unified effort of one American telephone company, AT&T, thousands of men and women who came from all over America to participate in the restoration event. And the, like I said, extreme ownership and logistics of owning every telephone piece of equipment in the United States and getting it to 13th Street. Now, as far as if you've ever been in a telephone distribution frame, it is rows and rows and rows of terminating wires from the floor to 15 feet up. Actually, we had rolling step ladders on tracks to get to the upper level cable pairs. And I've worked in these for years, you know, and at the end of the day, I say, where's the way out? Where's the door? How did I get in here? So I can imagine firefighters with their air packs running out, 0 visibility, like a mouse in a maze trying to find their way out, and they suffered greatly from that. We did have friends that perished prematurely. And when I mean prematurely, when you pass away in your late 40s, your early 50s, that's premature to me. I had several, Kevin Halligan, who I drove down to 13th Street, 2nd Avenue on March 27th, developed pancreatic cancer. Now, Patrick Swayze, the actor from Dirty Dancing, he passed away from pancreatic cancer. 2 years, you're checking out. And I got a call from Kevin. He moved to Reno, Nevada. He said, Tommy, cancer came back really hard, and I'm calling to say goodbye. And 2 weeks later, he called me again. And I said, hey, Kevin. And as soon as I heard his wife say, no, it's Betsy Halligan, I knew he passed away that morning. I had another friend, Jim McEwen, who worked with us at the fire. Saddest days of my life was driving him from his home in Yorktown Heights to Sloan Kettering here in Manhattan. As a matter of fact, he lived around the corner from retired Chief Tom Kennedy, who was his neighbor. So Jerry Collins, Bill Bremen, Joe Little, that's just 5 of the men, of the 100 men that I left the Bronx with. So after 6 weeks of 12 on, 12 off, 7 days a week, we were like programmed robots. Boss came out and said, hey, you guys can take a day off next week, but you all can't go on the same day for job continuity. 1 man leaves a day. Now, at this time, it was spring. Days were longer, they were a lot warmer, and the building was up and running, but it was in a temporary condition. Nobody knew that except us. We had to make everything permanent. And a second wave of cable failures came in as far away as Wall Street and Washington Square Park in the West Village. And the reason was these cables had been sitting for weeks in manholes filled with water with no air pressure on them. Because we lost the compressors, they were destroyed when the building was destroyed. So if you have a 2 millimeter leak or a crack, water gets in, and as soon as battery and ground are reapplied to these dormant cables, they short out. So we had to go pull manhole covers and clear those failures. Now, we did this until about July, when we were released to go back to the Bronx. And the following July, the summer of 1976, I was in Hampton Bays, Long Island, and I was fortunate enough to be introduced to Danny Newman. So the telephone company and the New York City Fire Department will always have an eternal affinity for each other because we were both in the same place at the same time. And as we have it, destiny has brought us all back together today. And I want to conclude with the last profound words on this dedication plaque. The New York Telephone Company fire. Some gave all, gave some, gave all gave some. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. And now, the man who is responsible for having us all here today, retired firefighter Dan Noonan.
Whoa. 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 Wow. Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's talk of that infamous night, our firefighting operations, and our consequences. At 00:05, 5 minutes after midnight, February 27th, 1975, 23 employees are inside the New York Telephone Exchange building. At the same time, the fifth floor begins to fill with heavy, thick, black, gray smoke. Fire! A workman shouted as fire alarms started to sound around him. He grabbed the phone. He dialed 911. Telephone's not working. Third floor workmen also tried to call for help. Their telephone lines were dead as well. At this time, the employees began congregating in the lobby. The lobby security guard tried his telephone, dead. He screams, "For the love of God." He screams to a workman, "Get the fire department, we have a serious fire." The workman runs to the corner and pulls the street alarm box. At 00:25, a firebox alarm was received at the department's Central Park Dispatching Center, transmitting Manhattan Box 465. I had the midnight watch at Ladder 3, located just down the street from the phone building. I was studying the department's rules and regulations. I was not watching SportsCenter. At 00:26, a dispatcher's broken transmission blared through quarters. Ladder 3, respond. Report of a working structural fire, Box 465, 2nd Avenue and 13th Street, the New York Telephone Company building. Acknowledge Ladder 3. Talk about the building. In 1975, the New York Telephone Company main switching center was one of the world's largest. Located on the southeast corner of 2nd Avenue, East 13th Street in the East Village section of Manhattan. It was an 11-story fireproof building constructed in 1925. It provided telephone service to a 300-square block area and was equipped to handle tens of thousands of calls an hour. And it also serviced 170,000 residential phones. This Art Deco structure was originally designed to be earthquake-proof, with the political unrest, mass demonstrations, and violent protest during the 70s, New York TEL reinforced the building to become riot-proof, with exterior windows constructed of heavy wire glass and reinforced steel frames that were mounted with quarter-inch Lexan and unbreakable bulletproof plastic. At the time of the fire, all windows at street level and second floor were covered with heavy metal cages installed to protect from the vandals who roamed the neighborhood. The place was a virtual fortress. As we responded east on 13th Street, we could identify Engine 5 was returning from a false alarm. They're already in the process of hooking up to a hydrant. The scene in front of the structure was one of confusion. When Battalion 6 arrived, employees of the building informed the chief there were 2 employees missing. A New York TEL supervisor directed the battalion chief and Ladder 3's forcible entry team to a display panel where the fire alarm indicated a fire 3 floors below in the sub-cellars. It was determined the seat of the fire had to be identified. We began our deep descent into the basement of the building. The halls were long and tiled. It was an intricate maze with several heavy steel doors in several locations. Smoke had gathered at the top of the corridors, creating a dim mist caused by the fluorescent lights that were giving off an eerie glow that would fade into blackness. The constant ringing of fire alarm klaxons, identical to a submarine's dive alarm, added to the surreal environment. To gain access to the cable vaults from the basement level, we descended a steep steel ladder to a passageway that led to a series of 3 5-foot ladders. This led into the underbelly of the subcellar cable vaults. There were no vertical or horizontal ventilation, no apparent secondary means of egress, no other way out. Our way in was our way out. A confined space, and visibility was 0. Engine 5 stretched their line from the front lobby, battling down the long corridor, down ladders, finally into this area. None of us could identify any glow or any visible fire. The officers had to remove their facepiece for clarity of handy-talkie transmissions, taking hits of the toxic smoke. I thought, good God, they're taking a beating. I had carried a powerful 6-volt searchlight. I thought it malfunctioned. Bam, malfunctioned, until I held it directly to my facepiece. Adding to these conditions was the melting polyethylene from the cables. It was covering the floor, and it was starting to adhere to our boots. Warning bells on our breathing apparatus began to ring, indicating 4 minutes of air remaining. We still hadn't begun to fight the fire. The company officers ordered the firefighters to back out. However, there was confusion in the black smoky heat as we tried locating the steep steel ladder that leads back up to the basement level. As we are following Engine 5's initial attack line that would lead us back to the lobby, we discovered it was no longer on a staircase, but now ran vertically up a wall. A firefighter from Engine 5, Al, wherever you are, from Engine 5 identified the ladder's position. He held on to the railing, alerted us, and guided us upwards. There were so many alarm bells ringing that firefighters would have to remove your gloves and place their hands on the vibrating bell to identify if it was your breathing apparatus that was sounding the warning bell. Within the confined space and the melting cables, the exiting firefighters became entangled with Engine 33 and Engine 14 sent to relieve Engine 5. Firefighters who ran out of air were body breathing and praying that the lobby was just ahead. Fortuitously, Lieutenant Jim Rogers of Rescue Company 1 had ordered a roof rope line to be used as a lifeline for the exiting firefighters to follow to street level. The entrance to the building was now like a football pylon. Exiting firefighters on all fours, crawling, retching, and gasping for a breath of fresh air. What was burning was over 100 tons of PVC sheathed wire inside vertical cables carrying clouds of hydrogen chloride smoke throughout the 11-story building in the community. The fire incident grew to a fifth alarm. There were 75 units, all heavy rescues, all specialized units, including the famed super pumper system. A total of 699 firefighters responded, many of whom were rock and roll guys and veterans of the war years. However, none of them have ever seen anything like this. Several hours into the operation, there was a massive explosion of hydrocarbon gas, knocking firefighters clear off their feet. After the explosion, all firefighters were withdrawn from the building. All had made it out except for a battalion chief and his aide. They were trapped on an upper floor. The fire commissioner / chief of department, John T. O'Hagan, instructed Chief of Operations Augustus Beekman to initiate rescue operations. Chief Beekman selected Lieutenant Michael Maloney of Rescue 3, known as Iron Mike Maloney, along with one firefighter to find and remove the chief and his aide. Lieutenant Maloney selected firefighter Eddie Guile. When Lieutenant Maloney and Eddie Guile followed the line into the building, they found a lone firefighter from Rescue Company 2 operating on a line. This fellow was Pete Bondi. They gave him a bullshit story that the chief needed to see him and back out. After a long and diligent search, they located the chief and his aide on an upper floor. The best and fastest removal was through a window into Tower Ladder 35's aerial platform. Since the bucket of Tower Ladder 35 was now filled with 5 firefighters in overcapacity, Lieutenant Maloney and firefighter Guile exited via the interior staircase. During their retreat down the stairs, a tower ladder line opened and blasted firefighter Guile on the side of his head, knocking him down the staircase, rendering him unconscious. Lieutenant Maloney, in a remarkable display of heroism, with his air supply depleted, dragged him out of the building. Their silhouettes appeared on street level where other firefighters assisted them to awaiting EMS. Firefighter Gower woke the following day at Bellevue, unaware of where he was. On a side note, perhaps 2 weeks later, after the farm fire, Lieutenant Maloney and Rescue 3 responded to a strip mall fire on East 144th Street in the Bronx. They were forced outside due to high heat. Once outside, Lieutenant Maloney dropped to his knees and fell unconscious. He was rushed to Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, where he was pronounced dead. He was 46 years of age. Perhaps it was the first death from the farm fire. When the interior attack was renewed, command had quickly identified and recognized that the toxic smoke was so thick, firefighters were becoming disorientated inside the 11-story building. The order came to evacuate the building for a second time. Members of Ladder 3 and Ladder 9 were fearful that those exiting from the upper floors may not recognize the first floor as their way out. They tied ropes off the railings to ensure that those descending would not pass the exit point, descend into the subcellars, and almost certain death. Ladder Company 6 had been assigned roof operations and had to descend in what was now a high-heat toxic flue with no visibility around them. Firefighter Bob Gallowitz, Ladder Company 6, had identified the exit and led his team to safety of the exterior. Many officers and chiefs stumbled out to the street, grasping for air with their lungs and throats seared. We were doing whatever we could for each other. We would leave no one behind. Across 2nd Avenue, Engine 55 had gathered at a long-ago abandoned bodega where there were shelves. There were shelves of fruits and vegetables on display on the sidewalk. The chauffeur of Engine 55 had a knife, and he was slicing the lemons after wiping layers of black soot off them. Firefighters were seeking a reprieve from the razor blade smoke and were squeezing the lemon juice down their throats for any kind of relief. Safety Battalion warned of a moving crack on the east wall of the 11-story building and had the NYPD assist firefighters in evacuating the adjoining tenements. There was resistance among the residents who were fearful that if they vacated, all their worthwhile possessions would be stolen by the local junkies. Eventually, residents ran from the tenements with towels over their mouth and bare feet. Of particular concern were children and infants whose respiratory tracts have not yet been fully developed. The wind-driven toxic smoke engulfed nearby schools where classes were canceled till further notice. At midday, motorists on the FDR Drive, 7 blocks away, had to turn on their headlights to drive through the clouds of smoke. Patients at the adjacent New York INE hospital were evacuated. The Red Cross sets up a shelter for evacuees at a YMCA. Of particular concern were the shut-ins, the elderly, the blind, the handicapped, many of whom live in 6-story old law tenements with no lines of communication. Local volunteers rallied, helped them delivering medicine, food, and supplies to those in need. Describing conditions to the public, the following transmission was broadcast by George Meade, WIN's radio reporter, from a helicopter 1,200 feet above at 0820 on February 27th. It's unbelievable. It's like a movie. It's the fire in the phone company down there. It's a very smoky fire. The smoke extends all the way to Queens. Mayor Beam made a brief appearance, having taken a breath of the acrid smoke. He returned to his limo and left the scene. The firefighters depleted nearly 1,050 air cylinders for their self-contained breathing apparatus. Each cylinder represents a firefighter who's out of air. Firefighters who lost consciousness were rushed to Bellevue Hospital. Phones in a 300 square block area of Manhattan went silent. The 911 system also goes silent. The department was operating on its emergency backup system. From the initial alarm at midnight to late afternoon, it was 17 hours before FDNY commanders gave the under control. Firefighting law has FDNY Manhattan Borough Commander John Blackjack Fogarty saying, "I watched the buckles on my turnout coat turn a different color." Many firefighters would claim they're watching their apparatus turn green. We inculcate in our young firefighters aggressiveness. It begins here at the Academy, the Rock. Chief Lee makes sure of that. When we meet socially, we speak of, "Wow, caught a good job last night. Fire blowing out 5 windows." The retort is usually, "Damn, I wish I was working. My groups never catch anything." However, when a telephone fire is mentioned, the response is, "Glad I was off." Although 699 firefighters would officially fight this deadly fire, the Medical Bureau and hospitals throughout the city, not just Manhattan, were overwhelmed with firefighters and civilians. At this fire, 250,000 pounds of PVC insulation bound to 1 billion feet of cable that would melt into hundreds of tons of smoldering toxic chemicals, bent structural steel, spoiled concrete, send hundreds of citizens from the community to local emergency rooms. PVC emits hydrogen chloride gas. When hydrogen chloride comes in contact with moisture, such as the throat, it turns into hydrochloric acid. The acid damages tissue, and the carcinogenic chemicals initiate and or promote cancer. Interesting enough, the first gas masks were created in order to protect from hydrochloric acid, the liquid version of hydrogen chloride. In World War I, 5,000 of our soldiers were killed by hydrochloric acid. A derivative of this was even used in the Holocaust. Consequently, for weeks, there were 8,500 businesses and thousands of professional people without phone service in a pre-email era who were unable to communicate with customers, clients, their suppliers. The destruction led to catastrophic economic impact that was felt nationally and had global implications. The FDNY kept multiple watch lines for days. AT&T, who was in the midst of an antitrust lawsuit with the Justice Department on the disinvestiture of AT&T, marshaled 4,000 employees and management from across the country, mostly members of the Communication Workers of America, to reconstruct what was the telephone building. They removed hundreds of thousands of pounds of smoldering PVC, replaced 1.2 billion feet of wire, 16 million switches, 2,000 vented or melted panes of glass, and removed 12 million pounds of burnt-out debris. You know, eventually we got back to work there, and we saw these guys. They're working there weeks after weeks after weeks. When they came out of a building, they were doing 7 days straight, 12-hour shifts. We come out, we see these guys completely covered in this film, completely covered in this PVC film. You could not identify the ethnicity of that person. I stayed in touch with this CWA through the years, and their cancer rate is similar to ours. As Tom mentioned before, AT&T referred to the restoration of the Miracle on 2nd Avenue. We referred to it as the disaster on 2nd Avenue or the Mount St. Helena's on East 13th Street. The smoke was so debilitating and caustic that 239 firefighters went sick in the street. This is in an era when going sick, when you didn't tap out, you didn't go sick. 239 brothers out in the street, leaning against buildings, on the sidewalks. And 239 is not representative of the number. It should have been closer to 500. And those who became sick in the next few weeks, years, and decades. Even weeks later, you say, oh, what's this, the flu? No, it's poison. You have poison inside you. And my reward for this and the reward for hundreds of others was 3 months later we got a pink slip. The city of New York laid off over 900 of us, all for the remarkable salary of $9,500 a year. Then the phone calls began. Danny, guess who died? Inevitably, it would be a firefighter from the phone fire. As time passed, the firefighters of the phone fire were dying off as young, athletic men. The word was spreading through the firehouse kitchen that scores of firefighters had been diagnosed with cancer or lung disease, all of whom were responders to the fire. We, the phone company firefighters, were ironically sounding the alarm to the city. Dr. Deborah Wallace, PhD, an expert in environmental health, in her game-changing book, Into the Mouth of the Dragon, Fires in the Age of Plastics, she devoted a chapter to the phone fire. She states, quote, there was no doubt that PVC in the telephone company fire caused a cancer cluster. Our medical monitoring consisted of a stamp of a red star on all 699 medical folders. It was not long before the folks at Bureau of Health Services and the light-duty details began referring to it as the red star of death. The UFA and the UFOA went ballistic when the phone company firefighters were excluded from the Cancer Presumptive Act, the New York State Cancer Presumptive Act of 1986. These cancers have a latency period of 20 years plus. Many firefighters had already retired when they came down with these cancers. Former Chief of Department, John Hart, a brief paragraph from former Chief of Department John Hart. John Hart stated, pre-9/11, quote, as it relates to injuries, duration, and damage, it was the worst fire in the department's modern history. He added, if we had to fight the telephone fire today, we go about it much more cautiously. And if it was demonstrated that the smoke was hazardous to the firefighters, I would hold them out of the building. The suffering of the families through the years is also notable. Below are just a few of the perhaps hundreds of stories. Dorothy Rogers, wife of Jim Rogers, Rescue Company 1, quote, I knew this fire was horrible. The smell stayed on him for days and days. Showering did not matter. The smell was continuous. Jim passed early from cancer. The Dietrich family, who's also here with us, whose father, Deputy Chief Bill Dietrich, who spent 3 days in the hospital following the phone fire. It is notable that Chief Dietrich had scored a perfect score on the Chief of Department exam and therefore was number one for the prestigious position. It broke his heart that he could not pursue his dream and that he had to retire early from a career he loved due to cancer caused by the phone fire. Firefighter Patrick Walsh, Ladder 3, was in my group that night. He was a member of the FDNY football team, the bravest. Diagnosed a year after the fire with colon cancer. He was told to protect his family and his 3 daughters, that for the pension to be effective, he would have to live till the end of November. He was especially happy when the month passed. He died 8 days later. Christopher and Matthew Bayonne, grandsons of Lieutenant Christopher Bayonne, a phone fire responder, who died early of kidney cancer. Neither Christopher nor Matthew had the chance to meet him. Jack Schmuck from Ladder 3, one of my mentors, and the most athletic guy in the firehouse. He loved all sports, especially softball. If there was a game, he was there. Jack's son, Bobby, who's here, spent a 30-year career in Engine 33. I recall the shuttles up to Sloan Kettering to donate platelets to Jack. And Jack passed early. I think he was 61. Bobby, was he 61? Oh, sorry? 62. Thank you. The Ryan family of Staten Island, seeking answers as to why their father, FDNY Captain John Vincent Ryan, a physically fit non-smoker, was to pass so early with no family history of cancer. Captain Ryan had 8 children. I'm sure I could go on all evening. And this topic, the topic of cancer-causing carcinogens, is current. The President of the United States at the State of the Union called for a plan to assist veterans exposed to burn pits and other toxins and to boost research as to the effects of toxic exposure. Following the towers, the world's largest indoor pit had to be the New York Telephone Exchange. All right, let's come down the stretch here. At the phone fire, we were up against the unforeseen, the unknown, a phenomenon. For the red devil that we have become so accustomed to fighting had metamorphosized his weapons into a dimension we were unprepared for. Plastics, PVCs, other deadly chemicals have crept their way into our homes and workplace. The days of wood and cotton fires are over. Following 9/11, many consider the phone fire to be the second deadliest and costliest in a long history of the FDNY. In the days following 9/11, some very distinguished folks from our Bureau of Health Services demand to see the mayor to see Mayor Giuliani. And at that meeting, quote, "We need to do medical monitoring now. We need to do it now." They, Mayor Giuliani and some of his staff, says, "Is there any evidence?" And of course, days after 9/11, there's no evidence. But the Medical Bureau Chief Officer says, "Do we want to make the same mistake as the New York telephone fire?" They knew all about that fire. They said, "No, we're going to do medical monitoring of FDNY 9/11 responders." So we started in 2001, and we were able to build off our knowledge of the New York telephone fire. Close quote. The one positive that came out of the phone fire is that we, the responders, know that we were the catalyst for the gold standard that is today's health care for 9/11 responders and our active brothers and sisters. I respectfully submit the perverse logic of, "Oh, well, no one was killed at that fire," is without merit. It is a misnomer. We were exposed to hundreds of thousands of pounds of burning polyvinyl chloride, hydrogen chloride, benzene, vinyl chloride monomer, chlorinated dioxins. Chlorinated dioxins are the most potent carcinogens known. The long-term health consequences on firefighters through the years has been most significant, akin to the cancers currently diagnosed in World Trade Center responders. We, the 699 responders, were faced with the arduous task of fighting one of the world's toxic fires with limited personal protective equipment. Many of us became sick. Many of us died. The American poet, Archibald MacLeish, who left Harvard Law School to fight in the trenches of World War I, wrote a poem on the soldiers of World War I, titled, "The Young Dead Soldiers Do Not Speak," in which the dead address the living. The last line of the poem reads, "We leave you our debts. Give them their meaning." So it is up to us, the living, to provide that meaning. We provide that meaning by recognizing the lessons learned from cancerous toxic exposure and maximizing our personal protective gear at every incident. And by doing so, we give meaning to those who went before us and who have sacrificed their all. However, until today, there was no tribute to those phone company firefighters who bravely served. Today is their time for their vindication, to honor their gallantry. We express our deep gratitude to all those who have made this happen, notably Chief Jay Jonas, Chief Frank Lieb, the Getting Salty podcast, Dr. Leonard Getz, Chief Sergio Niete, and the members of the Fire Bell Club. It is with regret when I read the department's notification of the passing of a firefighter from the World Trade Center. There is great sorrow. Yet my thoughts go back, yet again, to the remarkable woman and family members who did not have the coffin in the flag drape ceremony with all the honors and struggled through their loved ones' illnesses and raised their families. There were no medals of valor, unit citations, nor commendations at this fire. Yet, let me assure the families that your brother and sister firefighters on the FDNY love you. The American Fire Service, whether paid or volunteer, as demonstrated by their presence here, love you. And I know the Global Fire Service loves you as well. I'm going to go a little off script here. I'm going to ask those responders again to please stand. Could responders to the phone fire please stand? Also, I'd like to ask all family members and significant others who responded to the phone fire also to please stand. And all those who restored the toxic pile known as the New York Telephone Exchange, please stand. Thank you. Thank you. Everybody else. Thank you. Thank you. In conclusion, in the spirit of 9/11, where we proclaim to never forget, let us keep the memory of the phone fire firefighters and all the firefighters we have lost alive in our thoughts, our memories, and our prayers. And I know we will, because we are the American Fire Service. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
The plaque reads, dedicated to the honor and memory of all the brave FDNY members who operated at a fire at this site and those who succumbed to health-related illness from their performance of duty, February 27, 1975, Manhattan Box 550465, the New York Telephone Company fire. All gave some gave all. Let us pray. Eternal Lord of all, you have never ceased to give us signs that we might know your presence amongst us. You spoke to Moses from the burning bush and wrote in stone the commandments by which the righteous live. Today we bless a plaque on a wall whose words call us to remember the brave deeds and fearless devotion to duty which members of the New York City Fire Department demonstrated on a cold February night in 1975. Heedless of the cost, they entered the dark abyss and did what the members of this department always do. They protected the city from the ravages of fire while putting their own lives in serious risk. May the civilians who see the plaque in Lower Manhattan be reminded of the sacrifice made that night and the sacrifices that continue to be made by the members of this great department. May the young firefighters in training at this academy be inspired by the plaque here and recognize the great lineage they seek to join and level of dedication which is needed to maintain the well-earned reputation of this department. As we bless these plaques, continue to bless those whose service they represent.
Recover. Everyone please rise. Detail, hand salute. Ready, two.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Acting Chief of Department and the other members of our dais, I want to thank you all for attending today's very special ceremony. This concludes the plaque dedication and memorial wall unveiling. Have a great day.